If you're new to design systems, you might feel a bit overwhelmed and a bit scared when you see these super professional files with neatly named pages, complex sidebar setups, and what feels like millions of components. However, what you should know is that usually a design system starts out super simple, because in reality, it's a system that evolves over time together with your project. So in this video, we will build out the very base of a design system together inside of Figma to show you how easy it is to get started even as a beginner. Also, I'll wrap up with some important best practices and general tips, so make sure you stick till the end. And as always, I have the Figma file in the description below. Now, let's waste no more time and get straight into it. In this tutorial, I will be referencing Atomic Design. You will find a link to this in the description below. But I think I will be able to give you a good enough grasp of it in this tutorial so that you have confidence in using this methodology moving forward, or this framework moving forward. When you start creating a design system, what I usually like doing is to just design freely, not even thinking about a design system in the beginning. Because in the beginning, you don't want to be constrained by things. You just want to design stuff. Don't even think about what should be a component, what should be a text style or a color style or whatever. Don't think about that until you come to the point where it starts reoccurring. You start seeing that this heading here is being used a lot, or this icon size is used a lot, or this body large here is used a lot, or this button size is used a lot. When you come to that point and you start seeing yourself reusing it over and over again, that's a good sign that you want to create components out of them, or text styles or color styles, all of these things that then make up a design system. That's how the actual design system starts forming, because you're reusing things. So let's say we've designed freely here and we start seeing that we have these things that reoccur. So we have the icon, we have the heading, we have the body text, the button here, and these colors. In Atomic Design, what we would call this is that we've created our first atoms. So we have our icon here, icon warning, like I said. We have our heading 1, our biggest heading so far. We have a large body text, we have a large button, and we have the colors. Those things will, like I said, become components, for example. So we could create a component out of this icon here. So I just click Create Component, and we have an icon component. We have a heading. I could go to the text settings here and create a heading 1 text style like this. The same thing could be done for this body text, body large. For the button, we could create a component again. So let's call this component button. And for the color, we would create a color style here. So plus, and we would maybe call this primary, because this might be our primary color, the color we will be using for most of our important actions, call to action buttons, etc. And now we have our first atoms, and we might want to expand on our atoms as well. So for example, this icon here is now just an icon, but maybe we want different sizes of this. So then I could go here, hit plus to add a variant, and I would call this variant 32 times 32. I would change the property here to be size, and the first one could be called 48 times 48 because it's 48 times 48 pixels. And I would change, I would change the size of the second one to be 32 times 32, and there we have it. Our first icon component that now has 2 different sizes. And when it comes to the button here, maybe we want to add different states. So I would add variants, and I would call maybe this second state would be the hover state, and let's call the property here state, and the first one would be default. The third one could be active. The hover state would just be an opacity maybe. For the active state, I might want to add a stroke on the outside and increase the opacity a bit like this. And there we have an expanded atom component. And we would do this for all of the atoms that we want to expand somehow. So for buttons, icons, input fields, whatever you have that you want different states for or different sizes, we would add in here in our components as variants, for example. Now, the next thing that might happen is that we start seeing that we're using atoms in combinations. So for example, maybe we're using this text size a lot together with this icon. We have this thing where we end up using body large and the icon 32 times 32 in combination. So it's somewhat of an icon label. And in these cases where we're using two atoms or more together like this, we start creating molecules. So for this, I would also create a component because we're using it a lot throughout the app or landing page or whatever it is, because that is the biggest measuring stick you should have. If it's used a lot, then you can make it into a component that goes into your design system. So I would create a component here called icon label, and we'll bring that with us on the journey here. So we've created our atoms and our molecules, which takes us to the third point where we start creating organisms. And organisms are usually things that could be a combination of atoms and molecules combined into one thing, like a card, for example. So we could have a card organism like this, and then we could expand our card organism into different states, for example. So this card here would be our heading, a body text, so two atoms. It would be an icon, another atom, and a button, another atom. So a bunch of different atoms that makes up this card. So I'm creating an auto layout here, giving it some padding, giving it a background color with some opacity, giving it some rounding, and maybe a stroke here as well. Something like this, where we have a card component. And if we want to be fancy, we can tighten up things inside of it and change the spacing a bit like this. And there we have our card. Now, this would be fine as a component by itself. So I could create a component. But if we want these different states, then of course we would create variants for this as well. So maybe we have a variant for success, as in the example, and maybe we also have a variant for the error state like that. And the first one would be neutral, and we could call the property here just state. And in this case, what I would do is I would just change the colors here basically to be this green color instead, like this, and all of the faded out colors as well. So I would just change it up. So this is the green one. This one should be green as well. And maybe it says success. And of course, in a real component, we would change this icon as well. Then for the error one, we would say error, and we would change the colors once again to be error colors like this. And there we have our different states for our card. So if we lift it in from the assets panel up here, drag it in here, now we have a component, an organism. so something made up out of many atoms or molecules, that we can change like this. Now we've created atoms, we've created molecules, we've turned them into organisms. The last step that we might not have to do, but the biggest possible thing in this framework would be to combine things into templates. So if you're creating a landing page, a website of any kind, a web app or a mobile app, it doesn't matter. If you have bigger pages or sections on pages that occur more than once, then you might want to create templates. So in this case, we have something that could be seen as a card list section, for example. So we're reusing this same heading, we're reusing the same button, we're reusing the same cards, just that we've stripped some things. We don't have the icon or the heading, and we're changing the look of the button here. And we're reusing our icon label here as well. And all of these things together become what we could call a card list template. I could take this, create a component, and now we have it here in our assets panel. So whenever we're creating a new page where we need to add this kind of section, it's very easy for us to just reuse it. So this would also be a part of our bigger design system. And that's all that atomic design is. You have different Lego pieces that you create into bigger Lego pieces that you create into bigger Lego pieces. With that said, I want to move into the last part, which is about best practices and tips. So my closing thoughts on this subject, that is design systems. And the first thought for me, and one of the most important things when it comes to design systems, is you should be context aware. And what I mean by that is that in some cases, it might be a good idea to create a super sophisticated, big design system like Ant Design, for example, which has like buttons, icons, typography, grids, dividers, layouts, space. They have so many things because they're used for humongous applications. They have all the use cases. They have everything you might need. However, in most cases, you won't need it. In my day-to-day job, this is what my file looks like. I have a design system page in my working file. Now, I'm not saying that this is the best practice, but if you're in a small team, if you're a lone designer, if you're a freelancer, the design system should be there to help you speed up your process, which brings us to the next point, which is about saving time. Your design system is there to help you save time. It's also there in bigger teams, of course, for you to have structure, for you to build applications that are consistent. But if you're by yourself, don't stress about creating something huge. Now, we want to save time. And that means that in some cases, you might not need to create the full hierarchy of buttons. You don't have to create a button Excel until the need arises. You don't have to have a 96 times 96 icon until the need arises. Maybe you just need 3 different buttons and 2 different sizes for icons, or maybe you just need 1. You need to be context aware again and think about saving time, which brings me to the last point about utilizing the features that you have in Figma. And one of the most important features when it comes to design systems is the component properties. And I happen to have a video on component properties and exactly how to use them to make your design system even easier to use and more scalable for your future projects. Now, until the next one, Have a great life. We'll talk soon. Ciao.